So here, this all comes together. The historian and the computer scientist in one person, and then he went to Irvine in 1992 as an assistant professor of Chinese literature and thought. And this is where he went through the remainder of his academic career. But I think, Michael, you're still influencing the, so to say, further development of CBDB. And also presenting together with Michael Fuller is Wang Hongsu, who, if I'm informed correctly, is based in Beijing and who is the senior project manager of the China Biographical Database. Yeah, their talk will be the introduction to the China Biographical Database. And I'll leave it to you to introduce your topic. The stage is yours.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. Before I switch over to my PowerPoint, let me just find out could you raise your hand if you actually already are familiar with CBDB, just so I have some idea of and there's how much I need to explain. Okay, thank you. So okay, so the quite a few who aren't. This is useful to know. Okay, so now let me can I can I share? Let's see. Let me share my screen. PowerPoint share. From beginning. There we go. Okay. So when designing the talk, I tried to make it so that it would be useful for people who are thinking about how they want to proceed with their with building a new database. And so I've got a presentation that actually is going to look a whole lot like in its organization, like the one we just saw. So I'll be talking about the domain, the questions, so the domain of data that we were capturing, the questions that we're building around these the data, or that we intend to be able to ask about the data, then the structure of CBDB that we developed in order to be able to ask these questions and get some useful answers. And then finally, so when you get the structure, what can it do, and what makes it distinctive? And then finally, how do you get answers out? So this is the goal here. I'll try to be reasonably quick so we have some time for questions. And when we finally get, well, actually, Wang Hongsu might jump in at any moment if there are questions that are actually much more his area than mine. But certainly when we get to the interfaces, there's the API and the China web interface that he knows a whole lot better than I do, and I'll let him talk about those. Okay, so I'm going to stress a lot during this talk that CBDB is a prosopographical database, and I stress this because I discovered in a workshop on prosopography in Bonn that apparently that our understanding of prosopography is different from most everybody else's, and so. Which is interesting. So this is our version, and we're right. No, in any case, so it is a prosopographical database that is built to capture the entirety of the social world of pre-modern China. That's kind of a huge chunk, from the Tang to the Qing. And so in contrast, I'm well aware that the project around which this workshop is built is really about looking at the educated Chinese diaspora. So it's going to be quite a bit of the domain of data is going to look different. But nonetheless, it's still, I think, useful to present something about how CBDB was conceived and implemented in order to provide a useful perspective on biographical databases. Okay, so, oops. Okay, so our version of prosopography. Okay, so which we take straight from Warren Stone's comment discussion of prosopography. Okay, so prosopography is the investigation of the common background characteristics of a group of actors in history by means of a collective study of their lives. Okay, okay. Now the methods employed is to establish a universe to be studied, and then to ask a set of uniform questions about birth, death, marriage and family, social origins, inherited economic position, place of residence, education, amount and source of personal wealth, occupation, religion, experience, in office, and so on. And the point is that this is a long list. And it is, and we believe in the virtues of this long list, because then we have the next step here. The various types of information about the individuals in the universe are then juxtaposed and combined and are examined for significant variables. They are tested both for internal correlations and for correlations with other forms of behavior and action. Okay, so that's the plan. That's the goal. So, since it is a prosopographical database, the domain of it, as I say, is big. Sort of and sometime in the next century we should be finished. The domain of data is basically what the extant textual archive tells us about the lives of people in pre-modern China. Okay, and corresponding to our understanding of the nature of prosopography, the data elements are exactly as listed there. So birth, death, marriage, family, social origins, inherited economic position. Actually, there's not a whole lot of that in CBDB because the sources don't tell us, but more on that later. Sorry. Place of residence, education, occupation, so on. Okay, so that's our sources. As I say, the ambitions are to keep this project going for as long as possible because there is a huge wealth of data to be mined. But we started with the low-hanging fruit, which is to say there are a variety of modern indices. This etc. These were the initial convenient modern sources that we mined to get things going. Okay, then we also sort of are now working on extracting information from the juncture, from the dynastic histories and from the defuncture, which gives us information at a more local level. And then also, of course, then the particular Muzhiming and Mu Biao and these things for individuals that have been, remember, that there's been a lot of archaeology and sort of a lot of, particularly Tang Dynasty Muzhiming have been showing up, and we've been trying to incorporate that. We have been looking for social associations, right, from Wenji, from literary collections. And there's a lot of information in that. We've barely scratched the surface. The sort of office holding and basically Jinshi data. There are various types of aggregations, traditional aggregations of information that we have been mining. And luckily, very luckily, and I'll get to that, why we're so lucky, we also have other biographical databases. The Mingqing Women Writers database, the Mingqing Naming Authority database that we mined early as well. And then also the Kyoto database on Tang people, and then the Darbadrum databases for Buddhists. Okay, so it's a long list, but even though it's long, it still is in its own way profoundly limited, right? So we have, which is to say, it's primarily about elite men. Now, in the juncture, it's more elite at the national level. For the defuncture, it's elite at the local level, but they're still basically elite, and they're usually men. So that's why it's been very good that we've had Grace Fong's Bing Qing Women Writers database. That's been very valuable. But you're only in there if you wrote something that got published. So that's limited. And to say, and even among men, we don't know anything about merchants, craftsmen. There's a whole lot we don't know about, and our Buddhist materials still are very spotty. So it is, even though we have this huge collection of stuff, it is really important for anybody who's using this database to be aware of what it doesn't contain. And what it doesn't contain, because the sources just aren't telling us. In other words, we can dig stuff out eventually, but it's going to take a whole lot more work to expand the reach of the database. Okay, the questions we bring to the data, as I say, yet more on post-topography. As I say, the goal of all this is, right, to just juxtapose and combine all these various different types of data to look for correlations between them all. And because we design this thing not with a specific project in mind. It's very open-ended. We want researchers to be able to look for correlations about whatever they're interested in, right? And so this is our goal. Is to provide a set of data and their relationships, so that people can just explore what the heck was going on in the world of pre-modern China. Okay, so this is beating a dead horse here. Okay, structure. Okay, since we want researchers to be able to explore patterns of relationships among the many aspects of the lives of individuals in pre-modern China, CBDB is a relational database. Now, I stress this because many people say, well, why don't you make it a graph database? A relational database, in order to keep control over the large amount of data that we have, it really is best to be able to have the constraints, the integrity, the self-discipline that a relational database imposes on the people putting in. Okay, so database, since it's a relational database, that means it's got entities and it's got relationships between entities. Okay, the entities that we have in CBDB are people, places, the kinship structure of the society. So this is where it knows, kinship structure, as the structural anthropologists discovered long ago, and there are constraints on what sorts of kinship relationships are possible within a society, and the whole set of these possibilities form a thing called the kinship structure of that society. And so that's why it is an entity. Similarly, the structure of social associations. There are some associations that are validated, that are paid attention to, that appear in the texts. Others don't. And so this system of social relationship is, if you want to think about it, is a thing in the society. And similarly, issues of structure of social prominence, sorts of things that get paid attention to. It will change over time, but it is still something you can think of as out there. And of course, the more obvious ones, the offices in the imperial bureaucracy, ways that people can enter into the bureaucracy, as well, along with social institutions, and then finally the text. Note that we have as tables in CBDB a an entity that one could care to call events. But it turns out that extracting events and figuring out what to do with them from the data is unclear, and it is not well developed. And so, in the future, it may turn out that we can, in fact, build on this sort of information, but we haven't yet. Okay, and so when you have these entities, the entities are these abstract things thinking about the data domain. We are not yet at software that is a database. However, these entities, you represent these entities as tables. Okay, and so and each of these, and in these tables, each of the attributes of the entity gets to become a field in the table. But I think it's important to think of the tables and the fields as instantiations of these more abstract, but not very abstract, but as these historical entities. And so what you're doing is you're capturing historical stuff via the software that creates tables and fields. Okay, the relationships pretty much follow from the nature of the entities that we have. You've got biographical place data. So we've got people, places, and the relationships between the person and the place, all sorts of different, where they're born, where they're buried, where their jiguan is. We don't so much have where people visited, because that would quickly blow up out of control. But maybe in the future. Kinship data, sure. That obviously is relationships between people, association data, also between people, status data. Again, is the relationship of people to the whole status, the system of social distinction in the society. Posting data, where people, what sort of office people had, where they had it, when they had it. Entry, people can have more than one way of entry. So that's important to have that broken out as a separate field, as a separate table. So you've got people, you've got the ways that they entered, and of course, sometimes where they entered, and of course at the time. Biographical institution data. This is primarily at present looking at Shuyan, at academies. Buddhist temples are obviously another place that we want to collect data from, but haven't done so much yet. And then finally, data linking texts to people, which is to say biographical text data. So the people, the texts they were connected to, and the roles that they had in relationship to these texts. Okay, in addition to these and these of course are also tables, right? That the relationships get captured as tables in the database, and then we've got a whole bunch of other auxiliary tables that are useful to make the whole system work. Okay, so here is basically what we got, and well, pretty straightforward. We can come back to it if there are any issues. Okay, so the question is, so you got this set of relations, the set of tables, the thing. What can you do with it? Oh, actually, I have one more thing before I go on. Designing tables. There is an impulse. I mean, I don't want to slander the computer science folks in the audience, and maybe we can talk about this later, but the idea of primary keys. Okay, tables have primary keys, and the point of a primary key is to make sure that you have unique records and unique entities. But now it turns out that what one means by a unique record is not trivial. It actually requires some thought. As I say, I give the example of a Shuyan, of an academy. It turns out that it can burn down. It can be rebuilt, but in a different place, and maybe even with a different name. Is it the same place? And And this really requires a historian's intuition. And you have to and the historian says, yeah, it's the same place, even though its name is different and it's moved across town. Then you have to go with it. And that means that you have to disaggregate the name from the idea of the place. Say, okay, well, you've got to follow what the historians are telling you, right? Similarly, now this is a little bit trickier, and this is more a question of what you want to be able to ask the database. If, for example, we have a social relationship established between two people based on correspondence. So, should every letter be recorded as a separate instance of social relation? Or basically, do you just want to have the fact of the relationship recorded? And I think different databases can handle this in different ways, because you're planning to ask different questions. And certainly there are ways to aggregate all of this if you want to separate them all. But it's just but you have to think about what you want to do, how you capture it. So in any case, of course, therefore, how you structure a primary key is going to look different if you go by these different strategies. So as primary key, which may sound like a technical point, really is a way of defining what you think a unique instance of an entity or a relationship is. Okay, and this requires thought. Okay, functionality. Okay, so we've got all these tables, all these things here. How the heck do you use it? Well, you can use it in all sorts of ways. You can look at the interactions between all of these various things. Okay, so we got one cooked up here. For example, officers, officials from Fujian, were they going to have local kinship relationships with other officers, officials from Fujian? And was it different from the pattern in Sichuan? And how does this change over time? CBDB as a relational database can allow you to ask this question and answer it. So basically, what you need to do is you put together, you start with collecting all the officials from Fujian. And then once you got all of them, then you look at the kinship structures. And you can see how all this works out. Then you repeat the process for Sichuan. Okay. And then if you do all that, you get this. Okay, which exactly what it means, I don't know, but say I just build the thing. So this is the sort of thing that you can do in CBDB. Just cook up questions, figure out ways to ask them, and go with it. Okay, so however, since most of the stuff one would be asking, arguably, is going to be either SQL query type stuff or social network analysis type structures. And if you have to figure out how to let users get at this, the SQL stuff you can do directly if you happen to be a maven with relational databases. But to help everybody along, we've come up with 3 interfaces. And the first, of course, is the Microsoft Access front end, and that's primarily used outside of China. And then we have the IMDA online querying system, which is in China, and then the API, which people might be most interested in. Okay, oops. Okay, the Microsoft Access interface is the most powerful and flexible of the analytic interfaces. And that's because I have a lot of backend programming in it. I make it do things. And I use this as the platform for experimenting with new analytic functions, and say, just as an example here, all these various things, these various querying, the associations, networks, whatever, status, all these things, I've made it so that it now can take the output of these queries and put them into Neo4j, which is to say graph database format that you can then import into into Neo4j. Okay. Hong Soo is he around? Maybe he can explain what the INDA system is.
Yes, thanks, Michael. And this interface is in the user interface, which is our online query interface. And the story is like this. China Biographical database has an academic branch, and this branch is maintained by Harvard University, Academic Syndicate, and Peking University. And this academic branch licensed their data to a company in mainland China, which is named INDA. And this company can use their data to create their interface tools, platforms for their commercial purposes. And they and also the academic branch can still like to share the data, their tools, their platform to the users all around the world. And this for this commercialized branch, they are using CBDB like data to create the online interfaces, and this is in the user interface, and the users or anyone who they do not need to have the abilities to like even if they don't understand the database, they don't understand too much techniques, then they can use the if they install the browser, they can query the China Biographical database. And this interface now is can be freely used for the users who are not in mainland China or around the world. And also they have the market in mainland China. And in mainland China, most users in mainland China, the users can use 80% of the data. And the advantage of this user interface is that you don't need any pre-knowledge of this interface, then you can use that. And this is online query interface, and most of the queries are reproduced from the Access database. So yeah, this is a slide. And Michael, can we switch to the next one? Okay, this is a slide for CBDB API. And CBDB API is now maintained by the CBDB open source community. And we have an organization in GitHub, all the codes and all the materials and all the data can be get access to anyone in the open internet. And this CBDB API is now maintained by first some volunteers from some companies and from some universities, and also this API is also maintaining by our very important colleagues from Academic Syndicate. They have our colleagues in the Digital Culture Center, and many of our colleagues are contribute their efforts to the CBDB APIs and CBDB open source repositories. And here is an example of CBDB APIs. And if you want to search like Sushi and want to search his kinship relationships, and you can just use this link to click to search the data. And here you can find the person ID is 3767, and this ID is for Sushi, and the ancestor generation is 2. 1 means his mother, his father, and 2 means his mother's mother, mother's father, father's father, father's mother, and descendant generation 2. If it's 1, it means his daughter or son. 2 means his son's daughter, daughter's son. and collateral link means his brothers. If it is set by 1 means we won't include Su's brothers. If we set it as 0, which means we don't want to include Su's brothers. And marriage means Su's wife. And if we set it 1 means we want to include Su's wife. And if you are using this API, then you can just get the JSON file from China Biographical database, and you can use that data. Yep, that's it.
Yeah. I was thinking of trying to explain what the heck these parameters were. But not only can you get the wife, but you can get the wife's grandfather, right? And you get the wife's well, of course, the wife's grandson. But in any case, but you can also get the wife's brother, and the brother's kids and all that sort of stuff. In any case, it spirals out of control. It produces a lot of data. Okay. Oh, now I think I seem to have managed to skip the. Oh, there we are. Oh, and one thing. People very often call relational databases SQL databases. This is wrong. A SQL is just structured query language. It's a way to look at access information in relational databases. But there are other ways to do this. And one of the distinct things about CBDB from the very beginning was when I realized that we could loop SQL queries. That you can generate social networks. You can generate kinship networks, not by a single SQL call, but by successive SQL calls. And that this greatly increases the reach of the program. So I think that, so when you think relational database, think relational database, do not think SQL database. You're not constrained by what SQL can do. Okay. In any case, on to conclusion. Oops, conclusion. In any case, so this is the platform that we built, that the database for the overseas Chinese will different types of data, different types of analytic procedures, but the trick is to try to design it to make sure that this can happen. And the scholars, the historians, have to take the lead in this. Right. This is going to be a conversation between the computer science people and the scholars, but you got to decide what that entity relationship model is going to look like, and you got to decide what types of queries you go on. And building all this stuff in from the beginning is good, but don't panic, because you can always change it, right? But build the system so that it can be changed. In any case, so thank you. Almost brought it in on time.
Thanks a lot for your presentation and your insights, and also for getting up early to give this presentation.